Good evening, mortals. Halloween is upon us. This is the time of year when spooky occurrences and various fears are on the rise, which is what enhances my power, so I can spread more of my chaos. And who am I? Well, I never really had a name. I was just a dark spirit lacking an identity this whole time I was around. But since my vessel's known as Demonion Iznez, I suppose I could give myself a similar name. Perhaps Demonion Iznez. Yes, I like the sound of that. Well, if I'm gonna fit in with this realm, I figured I should make an attempt at this myself, with my first target being Cartoon Network. For the last 30 years, there's been a massive quantity of shows they've given to the mortals growing up. But little did these spectators know that deep within some of these shows, there would be some scenes that had the potential to seep into their nightmares. As an expert of evil and fear myself, I was more than fascinated to cover this topic, as I'll take you through a tour I set up. I like to call this the 4 levels of Cartoon Network's dark side. We're going to be looking at a brief sample of some very familiar, but still quite potent scenes that I'm sure gave you chills when you were younger. But now we'll see how well you can overcome them at your age now. Enjoy the ride! Before getting our hands dirty, I'm feeling generous enough to start off easy. So I say we should explore some of what I've considered the tamer dark moments from these shows here on the surface level, coming from the classic Teen Titans. Even as Teen Titans Go is still running wild across television, there are many mortals who still have their fond memories toward the original show. And those who've seen the show will certainly remember the legendary Slade, who met quite an end as he found himself in hot water, or lava to be precise. And this seemed to be it for Slade, or was it? The hunt for Slade continued in Haunted, but only Robin can see him. And that's because of one thing. I am losing my mind! Precisely. Robin has completely lost it. He's under the impression that Slade was back so soon, and he was under the impression the gang was holding him back from it. These hallucinations lead to constant confrontations and physical fights with who else but Robin, and Robin himself. It feels so deep when you see the art behind the planning Slade set up for this experience. And from what I've heard, many others who've seen it also seem to notice and even admire the horror aspect behind this, as some have given this the spot for the darkest episode of the show. But even though I enjoyed the horror this episode offered, I still stand by what I said before. I see a contest in this genre, as there were plenty of other disturbing moments in the show that I feel could easily compete with this. But I still enjoyed the wild rides this episode gave us regardless. Now we're about to take this a step lower as we transcend from the surface level to something more deep and noticeable. This level's made up from some of the more visually shocking elements from your beloved shows, like the typical "something seems wrong in this establishment" routine. I've seen a few cases of this myself that made some mortals witnessing this trope in these shows quite uneasy to say the least, with one of the most iconic examples being Samurai Jack's Jack and the Haunted House, where Jack finds himself trapped inside the house with these ominous visions and abandoned little Cooney. But things only get worse for Jack when he meets Cooney's family and finds out what happened to them and the house. But as you can imagine, Jack's able to fight off the demon and save everyone as usual. There's a similarly structured episode from a completely different show. I believe we're all familiar with Steven Universe, right? Of course we are. It's been labeled as a fan favorite by just about everyone. Well, except for that foolish mortal Nunion, who still has yet to watch it himself. But as a being who just started dipping his toes into the franchise, I for one understand the appeal, particularly from the episode Nightmare Hospital, as Stephen and Connie have to fight their way out of Dr. Maheshwaran's hospital, having to go there in the first place due to her stubborn nature. They have no choice but to survive the experiments of gem mutants, and these fellows have some impressively disturbing looks to them. But besides that, there's nothing else to address. Besides the family reconnection message, a decent episode I suppose. I especially love the mutants, but there's one example of this structure I feel was given a more impressive execution. And that instance came from Over the Garden Wall. Oh, what a brilliant show in general. I won't deny it's been considered one of the most endearing and also daring shows on the channel. This one episode, The Ringing of the Bell, had a similar feeling to Jack in the Haunted House, as Ward and Greg feel safe from Lorna's hospitality, until they find out that she's got a fellow demon inside her. And oh my, what a wonderfully horrifying appearance they gave us! I'll admit, I greatly envy them. And while we're on the topic of the show, how about that beast, huh? I must say, his build-up was worth it, even with the limited screen time. I especially remember the reveal of his grand plan, as he was manipulating the woodsman this whole time, using his daughter as a ruse to literally keep his fire burning. And not only that, but it's also revealed that his Edelwood comes from the souls of lost children. And Greg was close to being his next victim. The Beast was an extremely underrated villain, and this whole show was just as underrated. One of the most perfect shows to watch this Halloween season. Since these next two shows had enough to provide for my nourishment of eerie material, they were given their own levels. Now we approach to the next level down. We're all familiar with the Powerpuff Girls, right? No, not that one. Look, I know I'm a demon, and I like tormenting my victims, but even I have standards. Ah yes, that's the one. A classic among many 90s kids. These three girls risked their lives to save their little city of Townsville from many threats all over. And one of their biggest threats happens to be a close friend of mine, who I know you all recognize as him. An almighty being with powers that can let him do anything. He definitely knows how to put his powers to good and sinister use. He's shown the world his specialty of manipulation, as he's successfully gotten into the minds of many, particularly Bubbles in some cases. But he's also proven that he's strong enough to take over the whole city, as was demonstrated in the episode Tough Love. But his crowning moment was in Powernoia, as he attempted the famous Kluger solution, attacking the girls with the aid of their own nightmares. And you gotta admit, these girls have some fairly creepy fears. But with him's creativity, he managed to let them give off much more of a spook. And his ultimate form really left a great closing impression. I'm proud to have met the likes of him. But there's one other who had comparable skills at power and fear. Owlusion. Or as he's also known by, Abracadaver. This zombie magician had the city cowering before him, as he was giving off the performance of a lifetime. And he almost had Blossom disposed of, but those girls still found the ease to deliver this boy to his demise. Or, I should say, re-demise. Look, Lucian, you were great, but him's proven to be a far greater and smarter master of evil, so I still choose to side with him. This brings us to the ground level of childhood fears and nightmares that spawned from Cartoon Network, Courage the Cowardly Dog. I still remember how all over the place this show was. There were quite a handful of deep, dark instances which occurred in the show, be it puppet transformations, zombie movie producers, an exorcism spoof, and even jump scares. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I shock you? And this was just a sample of what's in store with the show. There were a few episodes that stood out to many who watched throughout. Take The Mask, for example. This episode tackled some rather mature topics you don't normally see in the average cartoon. At least, not to this degree. But you can tell there was still a lot of care and consideration put into the themes in the end, which I admit, I found to be daring while also quite nice at the same time. These next two focus on good friends of mine, King Ramses and Freaky Fred, both showing their own signs of loyalty and obedience behind the scenes, while also having their own creep atmosphere which I greatly admire. But I feel only one of these followers must be given the top spot, and no offense Ramses, but I give this one to Fred.
Oh, come on.
Your 3 plagues were incredibly threatening, and your appearance is enough to make anyone jump out of their skin, but your loyalty to me only went so far. I still remember you turning your back on me to go to that farm in the middle of nowhere, and just to get your slab? And to think we had something. Fred, on the other hand, stuck around with me that time, just like he always did growing up. What's that? You folks didn't know I had such strong connections to Freaky Fred? Well, of course I do. Where else do you think he got his hamster from? And what about his beloved Barbara? These were all gifts from yours truly. I made a deal with Fred all those years ago, as he pledged his undying allegiance to me. And I offered him his pet and his love at a later point. My boy certainly did not let me down. I was watching over him the whole time. It filled me with such joy to see him give in and shave his victims, to let his newfound temptation wash over him, to let himself open up in such a poetic and, well, naughty manner. This was the fruit of my labor. I made an oath of my own to one day free him from the home for freaky barbers. But even with my dark powers, I'm afraid it's been a surprising challenge. But I know I'll find a way to break him out in due time. This goes to show that there are multiple instances of cartoons not being solely for kids, no matter what some unholy corporate beings might say. I swear, that man's too evil for his own good. I'll have to remind myself to unleash one of my wraths on him. There's plenty of fears to be spread all around, even in these shows that many have considered family-friendly. They can be enjoyed by mortals of any age, while giving them a good scare, too. So I hope you got something from my tour. I'm sure you'll be able to find your own way out. Sure, I have the power to get you out myself, but where's the fun in that? This is where I leave you all to your own sanity, implying you still have some left to spare.